"Can I borrow your scarf?" The widow asked the rich rancher at the station on Christmas Day. Christmas Eve, 1877. A remote train station somewhere in the cold heart of Wyoming Territory. Snow fell in slow, deliberate flakes, the kind that settled into the silence like it meant to stay. The sun was long gone, and the light of the gas lamps flickered against the thickening white. Viola Bennett sat stiffly on a wooden bench outside the station office, clutching her 3-year-old son Jamie close to her chest. Her fingers trembled around the thin wool blanket wrapped around them both, but it was clear it was not enough. Jamie whimpered against her collarbone, his lips pale, his tiny fingers ice cold despite her efforts to warm them. Her own coat was thin, fraying at the edges, more a suggestion of warmth than the real thing. They were the last ones off the train. Everyone else had been met with hugs, wagons, laughter, even barking dogs. One by one, they had disappeared into the snow. But not her, not them. Viola glanced at the worn letter folded in her skirt pocket. The promise of a new beginning from a man she had never seen. "Come to Dry Creek, be my wife. I'll care for you and your boy." G.P. It was all she had, that and her son. That was enough. Jamie stirred. "Mama," he whispered. "I cold?" Her heart twisted. She looked up, scanning the platform for anyone, someone who looked like they were waiting, someone who might be looking for her. But the only people left were a tired porter and a tall man sitting under the awning's edge. He wore a thick, dark coat lined with fur, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the wind. A thick scarf was wrapped snugly around his neck, woolen and dark blue. She hesitated, then stood. Holding Jamie tighter, she stepped closer, her voice low, uncertain. "Excuse me, my son is cold. Could I borrow your scarf?" The man lifted his head slowly. His eyes were a pale steel gray beneath the shadow of his hat, catching the station's lamp glow just enough to glint. He looked at her, then at Jamie, at the small bundle of boy with flushed cheeks and shivering shoulders. Without a word, he unraveled the scarf from around his neck. His hands were gloved but moved gently, and he passed it over with a nod. Viola blinked. "Thank you." He still said nothing, but his gaze lingered a second longer than expected, softening. She crouched down and wrapped the scarf carefully around Jamie's neck and up to his ears. It was warm, still held the man's heat. Jamie sniffled, curling into it like a kitten into fur. The man stood suddenly. Viola looked up, startled. He didn't look at her again. Instead, he walked past, toward the bench closer to the station's meager heater, a small iron stove hissing faintly behind a wrought gate. Then he paused, turned around, and gestured to the bench he had just vacated. "For you," he said, at last. His voice was deep and deliberate, like it came from a place unused to much use. Viola stared. "Sir, that is not necessary." But he had already moved to the farther end of the platform, sat down on a crate near the open side, where the wind cut sharper, and looked away. She sat slowly on the still warm bench, pulling Jamie onto her lap. The stove's warmth reached them, not fully, but enough. Jamie sighed and laid his head against her shoulder. Viola looked at the scarf again, then at the man in the distance. He had no scarf now. His coat was fine, yes, but the wind was merciless tonight. She whispered to herself, barely a breath, "Merry Christmas." The man did not look back. But she saw one gloved hand move slightly, as if acknowledging the words, or maybe the wind had shifted. Either way, something small, something that mattered, had passed between strangers on a cold Christmas night, and it was only the beginning. The train hissed one last time as it came to a stop, steam curling into the crisp afternoon air. Viola stood up slowly, tightening her grip on Jamie's hand as other passengers gathered their things. Laughter echoed across the platform as families found each other, arms wrapping around shoulders, voices rising in reunion. Viola stayed back, watching the joy unfold like a scene from someone else's life. She lifted Jamie into her arms, his little body already shivering despite the layers. He clung to her coat, eyes darting around the station. "Is that him?" he asked in a small voice, pointing to a man hugging a woman in a red bonnet. Viola shook her head. "No, sweetheart. We wait a little longer." They stood still as the crowd thinned. Wagons rolled away, voices faded, and the laughter was replaced by the quiet crackle of wind through frozen trees. Still no one came. She moved toward the station master, who was scribbling notes at his desk near the ticket window. "Excuse me," Viola said, adjusting Jamie on her hip. "Is there anyone else expected from Dry Creek?" The man looked up with a half-apologetic shrug. "No, ma'am. No one from Dry Creek came for a bride today." She blinked. "But there must be some mistake." "Sorry," he said, already looking back at his papers. Viola turned away, her breath catching. She walked back to the bench, sat down, and tried to keep her face from crumpling. Jamie whimpered softly against her collarbone. "I'm hungry," he whispered. "I know, baby, I know." From across the platform, the man in the fine coat, the same one who had given up his scarf, watched. He had not left with the others. His hat was pulled low against the wind, his coat dusted with snow, but he had not taken his eyes off the young woman and her son. Now, he stepped forward, quiet and steady. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was low but carried easily in the still air. "Are you Viola Bennett?" She looked up, startled. "Yes." He nodded once. "I thought so. I recognized the name from town. The man who was supposed to meet you, he's known in Dry Creek." Viola tensed. "And?" He hesitated, then said simply, "Let's just say you're lucky he didn't come." Her grip on Jamie's coat tightened. "I see. I'm Thomas Hale," he continued. "I own a ranch a few miles north. My wife passed some years ago. No children." Viola looked at him cautiously, unsure of why he was telling her this. Thomas glanced at Jamie, whose face was pressed into his mother's shoulder. "I was here picking up supplies. I didn't expect." He stopped, shifted his weight. "No one should be left like that, especially not on Christmas." She studied him, her eyes guarded. "We'll figure something out." "I'm sure you will," he said gently. "But you do not have to do it alone." For a moment, nothing moved but the wind. Then Jamie lifted his head, eyes wide and curious. He looked at Thomas, then down at the snow-covered tracks stretching off into the distance. "Are you our train now?" he asked, his voice small but clear. The words hit Thomas like a stone dropped into deep water. He didn't speak right away. His gaze flicked to Viola, who was frozen in place, then back to Jamie. He crouched down slowly until he was at eye level with the boy. "I do not know if I am," he said softly, "but I can wait at the station for as long as you need." Jamie blinked, then reached out and took hold of Thomas's gloved finger, wrapping his tiny hand around it. Viola's breath caught. For a moment, the ache in her chest lightened. Thomas stood, Jamie still holding his hand. "I am heading into town now," he said. "There's a place where you can stay warm, at least for the night." Viola looked at her son. Then, back at the man she'd never planned to meet. And in that breathless space between heartbreak and hope, she nodded. The snow was falling harder now, the flakes thicker, swirling fast across the empty platform. Viola pulled Jamie close, trying to keep him shielded from the wind, but she could feel the cold creeping through both their coats. Thomas stood silently for a moment after Jamie's words, then looked toward the darkened town. "The roads'll be ice by nightfall," he said. "There's an inn, 2 blocks up. Clean place. I can take you both there." Viola tightened her arms around Jamie. "We don't want to trouble you." "It's not trouble," he replied. "I don't even know you." "That's fair," he said, then added, But I figure knowing someone takes time, and you won't have that if you freeze." She hesitated. Pride warred with reason. She was a mother first, and Jamie's cheeks were too pale. "All right," she said softly. "Just for the night." Thomas nodded, then led them toward his buggy. It was a sturdy black rig with thick wool blankets in the back. He helped Viola in gently, careful of her hesitation, then lifted Jamie onto her lap and tucked the blankets around them both. Viola avoided his gaze as he climbed up beside them and clicked the reins. They rode in silence for a few minutes, hooves crunching over the snow-covered road. The lamps of the station faded behind them. Dry Creek wasn't much of a town, just a line of low buildings with gaslights flickering in the dusk. As they turned a corner, Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out a small paper packet. "Ginger biscuits," he said, offering them toward Jamie. "Still warm." Jamie's eyes lit up. He took one and cradled it in his mittened hands like it was gold. Viola watched her son smile for the first time that day. "You're good with children," she said, then caught herself, not sure if she was prying. Thomas didn't look at her. "I've had practice. Not enough." She didn't ask what he meant. He didn't explain. That she appreciated. By the time they arrived at the inn, the wind had grown sharper. Thomas dismounted, tied the horse quickly, and then helped them both down without a word. Inside, the warmth was a balm. The innkeeper glanced up, surprised to see them. "Room for the lady and child," Thomas said. "3 nights. I'll pay now." Viola opened her mouth to protest, but he looked at her, calm, steady. She let him. Upstairs, the room was plain but warm. A small stove crackled in the corner. Jamie was already dozing off, biscuit crumbs on his coat. Viola laid him gently onto the bed, tucking a quilt around him, then turned to Thomas, who lingered at the door. "You've done more than enough," she said quietly. "We won't trouble you long." Thomas shrugged. "I don't see any trouble here." She looked at him for a long moment. And for the first time in days, she allowed herself to exhale. The next morning, the sky was overcast, and the snow had not let up. Viola bundled Jamie tightly, left him with the innkeeper's wife for a short while, and walked alone toward the town's central office. She needed answers. She had memorized the man's name, Jonathan Reed. He was supposed to meet her, supposed to offer a new beginning. Instead, she had stepped off that train into silence. At the town clerk's office, she asked for him. The woman at the counter gave her a look that was both awkward and familiar. "He doesn't live here anymore," the woman said. "Left town 2 weeks ago. Said he was headed south. No forwarding address." Viola's chest tightened. "He was supposed to meet me. I was to marry him." The woman blinked, then leaned closer. "You're the male bride?" The words dropped like a brick. Viola turned away before the sympathy could reach her. As she stepped out onto the street, she heard murmurs from behind the frosted windows. Curiosity, pity, even a chuckle. Every face she passed seemed to hold a whisper. By the time she reached the inn again, her hands were stiff from the cold, but her pride stung worse. She sat by the stove and pressed her fingers against her lips, trying to keep herself together. That evening, Thomas returned. He didn't ask where she had been. He only said, "Dinner?" She hesitated, then nodded. The dining room downstairs was lit with lanterns and soft laughter. Locals filled a few tables, mostly quiet. The 3 of them took a small corner spot. Viola tried not to notice how people glanced their way when Thomas walked in. Whispers again, but different this time. Thomas ordered stew and cornbread. Jamie nestled in between them, playing with the spoon on the table. "Want to hear a cow?" Thomas asked suddenly. Jamie's eyes widened. Thomas puffed up his cheeks and let out a loud moo. Jamie burst into giggles. Thomas followed with a series of snorts, clucks, and a very convincing hoarse whinny. Viola laughed, unable to stop herself. The entire table was shaking with joy. Across the room, a few heads